Welcome everyone to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're doing something really focused. We're going to kind of cut through everything else and look directly at some fascinating source material you've shared. Think of it as a deep analysis, really digging into specific descriptions, particularly relevant in the Bhagavad Gita context, but guided, only by the notes and excerpts provided.
That's exactly the plan. Yeah. We've got the source material, specifically notes from something called Kurukshetra War.
Right.
And our job today really is to unpack what this specific source tells us about a select group of warriors mentioned right there around the Kurukshetra War.
Okay.
We're not trying to cover the whole epic, obviously, way too big. But we want to understand the precise words, the language, the criteria used by this source to describe the abilities of certain figures.
Absolutely. And the source material, it points us pretty directly, actually, to a specific section. It's noted as verse 4 in one of the excerpts.
Verse 4.
And this passage, along with the notes you mentioned, it sort of sets the scene, doesn't it? It describes these warriors who are there in the ranks, basically getting ready for battle.
It does. And focusing just on this source, Kurukshetra War, it gives us a really particular viewpoint, a specific lens.
How so?
Well, it lets us really appreciate the exact words chosen, the definitions the source itself provides, and the specific comparisons it makes. We're here to understand the qualities, the skill levels, but strictly as they're presented in this source material.
Got it. So a very targeted look, just what this text says about their prowess.
Exactly. Stripping away the bigger stories just for now to concentrate on the attributes highlighted right here.
Okay, then let's dive into that language.
Yeah.
The source uses some very specific terms that seem to carry a lot of weight. Understanding how the source defines them feels crucial.
It really is.
The first one we hit is shivers. What does the source tell us about shivers?
Well, the source identifies them pretty simply, actually, but powerfully. It says shivers are heroes or warriors.
Heroes or warriors?
Yeah.
Okay, straightforward enough.
Yeah, it sets a baseline. These are individuals recognized for bravery, for capability in war. It tells you straight away we're talking about respected fighting men.
So Shura is the foundation, establishes them as fighters of valor.
Precisely. But the source, importantly, it doesn't just stop there. It gets more specific about the type of capability they have. It goes beyond just, general heroism.
And that brings us to the next term, which sounds quite descriptive, Maheshvasa. This sounds like it relates to a particular skill. Based on this source, what does Maheshvasa signify?
Yeah, and what's really helpful about this source is how clearly it defines these terms. It's unambiguous. It states Maheshvasa means great archers or great bowmen.
Great archers. Okay.
And the notes, they really emphasize this point. It's not just saying, they use do sometimes. No, it means individuals with extreme skill in archery. It highlights their greatness in bowmanship.
Extreme skill. So, master marksman.
That's exactly the implication, according to this source. When someone's called a Maheshvasa here, they're being flagged for exceptional, really top-level skill with the bow and arrow.
Okay, so we have heroes who are also master archers. That's already painting a picture of, pretty formidable fighters.
Definitely.
But then comes this comparison. The one that really seems to elevate the description and give us a benchmark, Imrajuna Samayudhi. That phrase really jumps out.
It does, yeah.
What does the source tell us about that? What's the meaning, the significance of being described this way?
Right, this phrase, Imrajuna Samayudhi, this is where the source gives us a kind of a direct measure of their effectiveness in combat.
A direct measure.
Yes, the source material explicitly translates it as meaning these specific warriors are equal to Bhima and Arjuna in war.
Equal to Bhima and Arjuna. Wow. I mean, those are arguably the biggest names when you think of martial power in this context.
Exactly. They're synonymous with peak skill. And the source isn't hedging here. It's not saying similar or nearly as good. It uses the word sama, equal.
Equal. That's a very strong word to use, especially in war.
It really is. And the source notes, they actually underline why this comparison is so significant. They explain it's done to highlight their war skills and strength.
Okay.
And it directly compares them to the great warriors of the time, specifically naming Bhima and Arjuna. So according to the source, that comparison is the benchmark.
So it's like saying these guys are operating at that level.
Precisely, unequivocally. Their capability is considered equivalent to two of the most formidable fighters known. It sets an incredibly high standard for their overall combat skill, not just archery, but effectiveness in war. Yudi, in the fight itself.
Okay, let me just sort of recap this based purely on the source. We're looking at individuals who are, 1, recognized heroes, shuras. 2, possess extreme skill as archers, maheshvasa. And 3, their fighting capability in war is explicitly stated to be on par with Bhima and Arjuna, Bhima-Arjuna Samayuddhi.
That's the package deal as described here?
This combination, straight from the source, it gives us a very precise understanding of the caliber of warrior being discussed.
It's concise, isn't it? But incredibly informative. The source uses this language to sort of classify these warriors immediately, puts them in a specific tier of martial excellence.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is that the source doesn't just leave it at these general descriptions.
No, it doesn't.
It actually names names. It points to specific individuals who, according to this text, fit these very high-level descriptions. It gives us concrete examples.
Exactly. It brings these qualities down to earth, you could say, by identifying the people who embodied them, at least in the specific context being described.
Okay, so who are they? The source lists 3 names, right?
Yes, 3 names are explicitly mentioned here.
And the first one is Yuddhana.
Yuddhana, correct.
Oh.
And the notes in the source, they clarify something important, that Yuddhana is also widely known as Satyaki.
Ah, Satyaki. Okay, that name is perhaps more familiar to some.
It might be, yeah. The source seems to use both, or at least connects them. And when we look at the details in the source about Satyaki or Yuddhana, well, he's presented as a perfect example of the warrior type we just defined.
Oh, so?
He's identified as a shura, a hero, a warrior. That's the base.
Right.
He's also listed as a maheshvasa, confirming his status as a great archer, a great bowman.
Got it.
And then, crucially, the source applies that highest benchmark to him. It says he is Bhima-Arjuna Samayuddhi, equal to Bhima and Arjuna in war.
So the source puts Satyaki squarely in that elite category.
Absolutely. It highlights his strength, his skill, both in archery and just general combat. According to the source's classification, Satyaki wasn't just, a good fighter. He was considered top tier at that Bhima-Arjuna level.
That's quite a statement about his capabilities, placing him right alongside those 2 legendary figures. Okay, who's the second warrior the source names in this group?
The source then names Virata.
Virata, okay.
And Virata, much like Yuddhana, is described using those same specific terms that signal this high level of skill. Again, this is according to this source.
So the same pattern.
Yes, he's listed as a Shira hero, warrior. Acknowledged. The source explicitly notes him as a maheshvasa, one of the great archers.
One of the great archers, okay.
And just like Satyaki, the source clearly states Virata is Bhima-Arjuna Samayuddhi, equal to Bhima and Arjuna in war.
So, including Virata here,
Yeah.
alongside Satyaki, and next one we'll get to, it really emphasizes his prowess, too.
It does. In the context of this source, putting him in this list, using these specific labels, it underlines his significant ability. It highlights his archery, sure, but also his overall strength, his effectiveness in battle. Puts him in that same high-caliber group defined by that comparison to Bhima and Arjuna.
It definitely elevates how we might think of Virata just by seeing the source apply these specific, very high-level descriptors to him. Okay, and the third individual named?
The third one is Drupada.
Drupada.
Right. And Drupada, again, he fits the core description the source lays out. He's listed as a shura, a warrior. He's identified as a maheshvasa. The source notes him as one of the great archers.
Great archer, check.
And the source confirms Drupada is Bhima-Arjuna Samayuddhi, states his equality to Bhima and Arjuna in combat.
Okay, equal in combat, check.
So, just like Satyaki and Virata, Drupada is characterized here as a great archer whose overall fighting capability is considered on par with those 2 giants of the era, all according to the source's description.
So, okay, all 3 Satyaki, also called Yuddhana, Virata, and Drupada, they're consistently described by this source as Shuras, Maheshvasas, and Bhima-Arjuna Samayuddhi.
That's the common thread.
They share these core traits, heroes, great archers, equal to Bhima and Arjuna in war. But you hinted there might be something more. The source apparently includes a very specific additional distinction that applies only to Drupada in this particular description.
That's right. This is where the source adds another layer. A crucial layer of detail, really, that sets Drupada apart, at least within this specific group being described here.
Sets them apart how?
While all 3 share that high-status great archers, equal to Bhima-Arjuna in war, the source specifically, and it seems only in this immediate context, calls Drupada a Maharatha.
Maharatha. Okay, that sounds important. What does Maharatha mean, according to the definitions given in this source material?
It definitely sounds important, and the source material is actually quite detailed in explaining the weight of this title. It starts by defining Maharatha simply as a powerful charioteer.
A powerful charioteer.
But then the notes, they go much further. They give a much richer definition. They explain that Maharathi, using essentially the same term, is a title indicating the highest level of war skill.
The highest level.
Yes, the highest level. And it's described as not just, driving a chariot well. It includes the capability of fighting thousands of warriors simultaneously.
Wait, fighting thousands? Simultaneously.
That's what the source definition says, yes. Fighting thousands simultaneously and possessing special skill in chariot warfare.
Wow. Okay, that definition, fighting thousands at once, as provided by the source, that paints a picture of, well, not just a skilled individual, but someone capable of impacting the battlefield on a massive scale from their chariot.
Exactly. It's a whole different level of impact being described. The source uses this title, Maharatha, applied specifically to Drupada right here, to indicate supreme level of martial competence. It goes beyond just being a great archer or even being equal to Bhima and Arjuna in general combat skills.
So it's highlighting a particular mastery.
Yes, a mastery of chariot warfare and this almost unimaginable capacity as described to engage huge numbers of enemies at the same time.
So let me get this straight. According to the source, Satyaki and Virata are elite warriors, benchmarked against Bhima and Arjuna. Very high praise.
Extremely high praise.
But Drupada, in addition to meeting those criteria, also holds this unique additional status of Maharatha, which signifies this ultimate tier of skill, including fighting thousands and chariot mastery.
That's precisely the distinction the source makes in this description. While all three are incredibly formidable, Drupada gets this extra label, Maharatha, marking him out, according to the source's definition, as possessing that very apex level of skill.
That is a powerful distinction, and it's drawn directly from the language, the definitions within this source material.
Absolutely.
It shows a kind of hierarchy of skill being described, doesn't it? Even within this already elite group compared to Bhima and Arjuna, Drupada gets this specific title, marking him, by the source's own terms, as capable of fighting thousands special chariot skills. Just wow.
It absolutely does. It shows the granularity, the level of detail the source uses to classify martial excellence. It's not just one big block labeled highly skilled. There are further distinctions being made, and the title Maharatha, as defined right here in the source, represents the very top of that scale.
Okay, let's pause here for just a moment.
Yeah, good idea. And maybe reflect on how understanding these really specific definitions, these distinctions drawn directly from the source, helps us appreciate the nuances, The nuances of the military capabilities being described right there in the ranks, getting ready for battle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, if you're finding value in this deep dive where we're trying to give you these clear, direct insights straight from the source material, and maybe you're interested in finding more ways to gain knowledge, to deepen your understanding on all sorts of topics efficiently, effectively. Well, I highly recommend visiting https.techdohub.com. They've got resources there that can really help you continue your learning journey, gain valuable perspectives, even on complex subjects. That's https.techdohub.com. Check it out. Okay, so picking back up on our deep dive into the source material, we've seen how it specifically identifies Satyaki, also called Duryodhana, Virata, and Drupada,
Right.
and describes them using these key terms, Maheshavasa, meaning great archers, and Bhima-Arjuna Samayuddhi, meaning equal to Bhima and Arjuna in war.
Yes, those are the core descriptors applied to all three in this section.
And we've also noted that significant extra detail the source provides just for Drupada, explicitly calling him a Maharatha.
And that title, as the source defines it, represents the absolute highest level of war skill, including that incredible capacity to fight thousands simultaneously and exceptional chariot warfare ability.
Right. The source's emphasis, it seems pretty consistent through these precise terms, and that direct comparison to Bhima and Arjuna is really on highlighting the exceptional prowess of these individuals.
Yes, the source is clearly focused on establishing their high caliber.
Now, this source material is very focused, as we said, and sometimes what a source doesn't say is just as important as what it does say.
That's a very good point.
What are the limitations here? What kind of information does this particular passage not give us about these warriors?
Right, and that's an important distinction to draw based on the notes provided with the source. While the source paints a very clear picture of their level of skill, their capability, it's noted that it doesn't really provide details about their specific narrative roles, throughout the war itself.
Meaning?
Meaning this source, or at least this specific section we're looking at, it doesn't recount, say, specific duels they fought in, or major battles they turned the tide of, or even who they fought against at particular moments. That kind of storytelling isn't here.
Ah, okay. So it's more like a military assessment, a capability rating given at the outset maybe, but not their actual battlefield history or their individual stories within the war.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. The source's explicit focus right here seems to be on describing their general level of combat capability and skill before the fighting really kicks off. It uses those specific high benchmark terms, great archer, equal to Bhima and Arjuna Maharatha, to establish how good they were considered to be, according to this description. It leaves the details of their actual actions, their contributions during the war. Well, that's presumably for other texts or maybe other parts of this source to cover.
So it defines their potential based on skill, not necessarily their historical performance record in the conflict itself.
Exactly. It's about their described attributes and benchmarked level at this point in the narrative.
Okay, this brings us back to that really crucial comparison then. Why? Why does the source specifically benchmark these warriors against Bhima and Arjuna? What's the underlying significance of that comparison, according to the source's own explanation?
Well, the source itself gives a pretty clear reason for this, as noted in the material we have. It states that comparing them to Bhima and Arjuna serves to, and I'm quoting loosely here, highlight their war skills and strength.
Just make it obvious how good they are.
Pretty much. It's a direct way of saying their capabilities aren't just, significant. They're on the same tier as the absolute top fighters everyone knows. It explicitly compares them to the great warriors of the time, naming Bhima and Arjuna.
Okay.
So the significance, as the source explains it, is really about establishing an immediate, recognizable, and incredibly high standard for their competence, their martial excellence.
Like a shorthand, then?
Kind of, yeah. A shorthand to tell the reader or listener, look, these individuals aren't just background figures. They are forces equivalent in capability to the most renowned warriors on the field.
So it implies they have that same mix of strength, skill, maybe experience.
Yeah.
Whatever puts Bhima and Arjuna at the top, these guys have it too, according to this description.
Exactly. It places them firmly in that elite class, worthy of being named in the same breath when you're talking about sheer martial prowess.
That makes a lot of sense. It's using the most respected figures as the yardstick to immediately convey the extraordinary level these other warriors possess, at least as seen through the lens of this particular source. It's quite a powerful narrative device, really, used by the source to emphasize the quality within the army's ranks.
It absolutely is. And it tells us something important, that the army being described here isn't just big. It also contains, well, a significant number of individuals operating at the very highest levels of combat effectiveness, as defined by that ultimate standard Bhima and Arjuna.
When you think about this level of detail, the classification the source provides, defining Maheshvasa, Maharatha so precisely, using the Bhima-Arjuna benchmark.
Yeah.
What does this very focused description suggest about the source's perspective? Maybe on, say, military organization, or the value it places on specific measurable skills like archery or chariot warfare?
That's an interesting angle. It suggests, I think, that the source places real value on categorizing, on recognizing specific types and levels of martial skill.
Right. It's not just good fighter.
No. Definitely not. The fact that it breaks down prowess into these components, you've got general heroism, the Shura, then specific weapon mastery, like Maheshvasa for archery, then that overall combat equality, Bhima-Arjuna Samayuddhi, and then the supreme tier, Maharatha, with those specific capabilities like fighting thousands and chariot mastery.
Yeah.
Well, all that indicates a pretty sophisticated understanding, or at least appreciation, for the different dimensions of military effectiveness. The source isn't just listing names, it's providing a classification of their abilities, anchored by its own clear definitions and benchmarks.
So the source wants us, the reader or listener, to understand not just who was there, but how capable they were using these specific metrics.
I think that's exactly right. It's a way for the source to immediately convey the formidable nature of the forces being described. It details the top-tier talent and gives us the tools, its definitions, to understand why they're considered top-tier.
It's communicating strength through the described quality of its elite warriors, using benchmarks everyone would recognize to make that quality feel real and relatable.
Precisely. Quality over just quantity, perhaps, is being emphasized here through these descriptions.
So let's just pose a final thought here, drawing directly from what the source has shown us. Considering the source highlights specific individuals, Duryodhana, Satyaki, Virata, and Drupada, as being explicitly equal to Bhima and Arjuna in war, and even grants Drupada that unique, highly defined Maharatha title. What does this focused description, maybe just in this one verse or section, suggest about the overall depth, the distribution of elite skill present in the army, beyond just the most famous names we always hear about?
That's a great question to reflect on.
Because the source isn't just hyping Bhima and Arjuna, it's pointing to others who meet that standard. And in Drupada's case, arguably surpassing it in a specific way, according to this source's definition. It really makes you wonder about the sheer scale of, well, valor and competence being described as present in those ranks, doesn't it?
It really does.
It suggests that the celebrated strength wasn't maybe just confined to a handful of heroes. There were others operating at that level.
Indeed. I think the source, through this very precise, very focused description, it gives us a glimpse, doesn't it? A glimpse into potentially the sheer number of high-caliber warriors present. It effectively benchmarks them against the greats, against Bhima and Arjuna.
Right.
It defines their skill level so clearly using these specific terms and comparisons, even while, as we noted, it deliberately leaves their specific battlefield stories for other contexts. But this detailed cataloging of elite prowess, especially mentioning individuals at that equal to Bhima and Arjuna level, and that specific Maharatha distinction for Drupada. Yeah, it paints a picture, according to this source, of an army described as having a truly formidable depth of talent right at its highest levels.
A formidable depth. That's a good way to put it.
It really invites us to appreciate the scale of the forces being described, not just in sheer numbers, maybe, but in the quality of the individual fighters present. At least that's the picture this source is painting with these descriptions.
Well, this was a genuinely insightful deep dive, and I appreciate how we stuck strictly to the definitions and descriptions found right there in the source material you provided.
Pleasure.
Understanding these specific terms, Maheshvasa, Bhimarjuna Samayuji, Maharatha, and their meanings, according to the source, plus those precise comparisons. It definitely gives a much richer appreciation for how martial skill was categorized and highlighted in this particular text. So thank you for joining us on this exploration.
Yeah, it's always powerful, isn't it, to see how much detail and insight you can get just by focusing intently on the specific language a source uses. Those definitions, they really offer a unique window into the criteria used back then, or at least by this author, to assess and describe warrior capabilities.
Absolutely. And listeners, remember, if you're looking for more resources to expand your own knowledge and skills, maybe across different topics, just like we've tried to expand our understanding of these warrior descriptions today, please do make sure to visit https.techdohub.com.
Good call.
They offer resources really designed to support your continuous learning journey, help you explore complex topics with, hopefully, more clarity and depth.
And in continuous learning, it really is a powerful pursuit, isn't it? Opens up new perspectives, deeper understanding, whether it's ancient texts like this or, modern technology, it's all valuable.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you for listening to the TechEduHub.com online podcast.